Hey you guys, it's Peter, and welcome to my channel, Peterisms, where I tell stories of my life and just little things that I have learned as I've grown into the person that I am today. And as you can see, I have a little helper with me today. He helped me out on my haul video that I did today after Cousin Fun Day. On my Peter Does Stuff channel, I got some treats today for little Boo Radley, and so he got to sample the treats today, and he loved that. But they were already treats that he already loved, so I knew it was going to go well, because you don't want to give a dog a treat that he's not going to like on camera, you know? So anyway, but now he's back in his bed and he's resting. He's got to run around all morning long, and I was up very, very early today because our electricity went out and I cannot sleep without a fan in the bedroom. And so I brought this travel fan out and I had it hooked up. Anyway, it's a long story, but I couldn't sleep at all this morning. So I'm going right now on like an hour and a half of sleep. I filmed a video earlier today for my drama channel about my OCD. Something that I've talked about over here, something I've talked about on my Peter Does Stuff channel, but I did a like 50-minute video talking about my journey through working through OCD. So if that's something that you're interested in, please go check that video out. It's over on my Peter Monn drama channel. And I did it over there because I explained why, but I kind of wanted to make sure that maybe more people got to see it that wouldn't watch it, you know, on one of my other channels that don't follow my other channels. And I explained the reasoning why I was making that video and my therapist's encouragement on making that video. So anyway, to go check that out. But I was looking through some of the comments, and I gotten some DMs from people about suggestions for videos that they would like to see over here. So thank you for that. I appreciate it. And I saw this comment on my video, and I thought it's something that I actually get asked about a lot, being that I am sober by way of a 12-step program. So if this is your very first video over here of mine, which I can't imagine this would be somebody's very first video. If this is your very first video, I don't know, just put a heart or something below so that we know it's you, or just say first time here. That would be hilarious if this would be your first video that you would stumble across on this channel. I think most people that watch this channel also watch my vlog channel. Or just this channel alone. And so this isn't kind of a channel that you just kind of stumble across. I don't think these videos are being highly recommended, and I don't care. I love doing these videos over here. But for those of you that don't know, if you haven't heard me say it 9 million times, I have been sober for 29 and a half years. My sobriety birth date is December 17th of 1994, and I'm actively involved in a 12-step program. I have a sponsor. She is a sponsor. I have a home group. I'm of service, and I work steps and things like that. So that's how I stay sober. I respect anybody's decision to get sober and stay sober however they choose to do it. So I just want to make that very, very clear before I get into this, because that will come into play of my working a 12-step program into this comment that I got. Because one of the comments that I get from people is, you know, people that don't work a 12-step program will say to me, Peter, thank you for the inclusion of saying that however somebody gets sober. And I will tell you that I think my earlier years of sobriety, well, first of all, in my early years of sobriety, there wasn't like MAT treatment programs. There wasn't like, you know, maintenance drugs. There wasn't like all these alternative methods to sobriety. There really wasn't. It was either like a 12-step program or church. And a lot of people did both. So there wasn't really an alternative to when I got sober. It was kind of like you work a 12-step program or that's it, right? And so, you know, it's interesting, like people that have worked a 12-step program, and I always tell people like try different meetings, right? Because I have been to meetings in my life that I didn't feel like was a good fit. But when people will be like, oh, it's cultish and they're forcing on you, I have never, ever had anybody beg me to stay in a meeting. And nor have I had my friends begged, or I mean, that's just not how a 12-step program works. So if you're going to a meeting where people are like trying to enforce on you their belief systems, or, I mean, that's really kind of the whole idea. To be honest with you, I wouldn't have stayed around a 12-step program if I wasn't able to come up with my own belief system about a higher power, if somebody forced me to believe something. You know, there's a whole idea of, well, there's a whole list of traditions behind 12-step programs that say what you can say and can't say. I mean, we don't talk about outside issues, which includes politics. We don't discuss those things in meetings. They're not brought up in meetings. I mean, somebody, if you bring it up as a topic, somebody will be like, okay, not here, time out. This is not the place to talk about it. We don't talk about those things in meetings. We talk about the common bond of addiction and recovery. So for me, when I hear those things, it's interesting because that's not the experience that I've had, okay? I wasn't looking to join a cult, and I can tell you if this was a cult, I wouldn't be in it today, right? But that doesn't mean that that's for everybody. And so when I say that, other people that do not work 12-step programs will say, Peter, thank you for the inclusion of saying that. So this is where my opinions kind of change. And you have to remember, like, I've been sober for over 29 years. I have friends of mine that have been sober 30 days. I have friends of mine that have been sober 40 plus years, 50 years, right? And since I've been sober over 29 years, I've seen the difference of different programs start up, different ideas, different recovery ideas, the introduction of, maintenance drugs like Suboxone and things like that, and Vivitrol and other drugs that are out there now. And abuse was, I think, the very first one with alcohol. And I've seen, like, these drugs come and go and come and be abused and come and be used appropriately and on and on and on. I've seen all of it. I've seen all sides of it. And so, I mean, I think in anything you're going to do, there's good, there's bad, and there's the middle. And you can find whatever you're going to find. I think when I was in early sobriety, I felt so safe by staying sober in a 12-step program that I really couldn't see outside of that, if you want to know the truth. And so, like, if anybody else was like getting sober or just like whatever, my only issue is when people would just like kind of like white knuckle it. And I will tell you my issue with that. It's not really that I have an issue with them. I mean, to be honest with you, I am of the belief that if anybody is alive today, however they stay alive by not using drugs and alcohol, more power to them. I know a lot of people that do not use opioids, heroin, and things like that today, but choose to smoke marijuana. And if that works for them and they are staying alive and they are happy, that is not mine to judge. It is not my place. And I can tell you right now, that is kind of an attitude, okay, of 12-step programs. And I know that people don't necessarily believe that, but I had a sponsor for over 12 years of sobriety, a man that I loved dearly, that was highly respected in 12-step programs, still is highly respected even though he's passed away, and he passed away sober at 41 years sobriety. And I can remember at one point sponsoring or being asked to sponsor somebody that basically told me that, they weren't going to stop smoking pot. And at this time I was hearing people be like, oh yeah, I'm on the marijuana maintenance program. Like, I don't drink, I don't do heroin, but I still smoke pot. And I can remember, this was when I had first come back into going to meetings, because there were 4 years that I didn't go to meetings. And I can remember when I came back in and I said to my sponsor, I said to him, like, I don't understand this. Like, they're not really sober. They're like smoking pot. And I'll never forget, he like patted my shoulder and he was like, if it works for them, it works for them. Like, it's none of your business how they work their sobriety, right? And it was around that time that kind of my opinion changed. I think I was so scared of looking at how somebody else stays sober, that like how that would be a reflection on me and what I had to make my own decisions for me, okay? And for me, a marijuana maintenance program would not work. I love to smoke pot. I smoked tons of pot back in the day. I loved it and suffered very little consequences from smoking pot. In fact, people ask me all the time about cravings and things like that. I mean, I have to be real careful, like, I don't want to go into any cannabis stores and things like that, because that's dangerous for me, right? Because I can rationalize the hell out of that. I mean, I am totally for the decriminalization of marijuana. I think it's ridiculous that we have people sitting in prison sentences for failed drug screens, okay? I also think that there's a lot of medicinal uses for marijuana when we destigmatize it, that we'll be able to use it. That has to happen nationally. And I think I think people find it strange that I'm in recovery, but I totally believe in the decriminalization of marijuana. I'm fully aware that there are a lot of people out there that can smoke pot, drink alcohol, even use recreational drugs from time to time, and they are not affected by it the way that I am. I'm greatly affected by all those things. When I smoked pot all day, every day. I was high all the time, okay? So for me today, that wouldn't work for me. And I have to know my own truth, right? But people ask me all the time about like my definition of sobriety, because when I get in a video and I talk about that and I come from a 12-step point of view, I get other people that work 12-step programs and they'll say, that's not sobriety. Somebody smoking pot is not sobriety. Somebody doing this is not sobriety. Well, those are people that aren't working 12-step programs necessarily, right? Or they have to figure things out for themselves. I haven't noticed many people that have lasted a long period of time in a 12-step program on a marijuana maintenance program, because they have to kind of keep it a secret, obviously, because to work a 12-step program, it's a program of abstinence from all mood-altering substances. And so if you're going to be in a 12-step program, that's kind of expected. So you're probably not going to make it long in a 12-step program smoking pot, but that's also not my place to tell somebody they can't stay in a meeting. It's nobody's place to tell somebody that they can't stay in a meeting. When I got sober, there were a lot of like wet alcoholics in meetings, and what that meant was, and I don't see a lot of that today, but when I first got sober, I saw it all the time. People showing up to meetings drunk, or people showing up to meetings high. I mean, you could tell. I mean, they would just be wasted in a meeting, right? And that was such a message for the newcomer and for those of us that, were around to say, like, that could still be me, right? And a lot of those people that I saw that came in as what we called wet alcoholics are still sober today. They had to come to meetings drunk. They had to come to meetings high, right? Like, that was part of their journey, and I can remember, like, one of the fundamentals that I was taught in recovery was, you don't get in a relationship your first year of recovery for a couple reasons. One of those reasons is, A, you have nothing to give another human being, okay? In that first year of recovery, you need to be focusing on yourself. So you have nothing you're such a mess, you have nothing to give to somebody else, right? Number one. Number two, you should be taking that time to devote it to yourself. Well, I have a very dear friend of mine in recovery. It's nobody that I've ever mentioned in my videos. It's not Tanya Jean or anybody like that. But I have a friend of mine that has sponsored a lot of women. And I can remember talking to her one time about this whole attitude because the people that she sponsors, the women that she sponsors, they do date sometimes. And I said to her, I said, like, isn't it interesting that, like, our opinions have changed about this over time? And she said, let me tell you when it changed for me. And I'll never forget this. She said, I had somebody say to me one time, maybe they need to be in a relationship to learn that that's not what they're supposed to do. And she said, what I learned was, it is not my place to stand in the way of somebody else's pain. Somebody else's pain or somebody else's joy might be part of their journey, and it's not my place to stand in the way of that. Now, what's so interesting to me about that is that when I first got sober, okay, I jumped into a relationship right out of treatment, okay? It lasted like 3 months. After that relationship ended, I got right into another relationship with a pothead, okay, that I was in love with for much of my life until he passed away. And that was my second relationship. After I got out of that one and I was devastated, I talked to my sponsor and he said, are you ready to do it my way now? And I said, yeah, I am. He goes, okay, no relationships, until I tell you that you can. So it was important for me to have some time. But that sentiment of, it's not my place to stand in front of somebody else's pain. My job as a sober person is not to dictate or tell somebody else how to stay sober. My job is to tell myself and do the things that are suggested to me. My job is to clean up my side of the street and take care of myself and my sobriety and be an example to other people. That's it, period. My job is not to tell somebody else what to do. I have never had a sponsor in my life, and I've had like 6 or 7 sponsors. I could go through and count them right now. I said that in a video the other day, but I think I've had 6 or 7 sponsors in my entire 29 years. And I have never once had a sponsor say to me, like, you need to do this or you need to do that. I've never had a sponsor, maybe once or twice, say something kind of close to that, but I've never had a sponsor say to me, like, if you do this or if you don't do this. I've never had a person say this to me in a meeting or anything. If you don't do this, then you have to leave. Or if you don't do this, blah, 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 whatever. The closest it was, I was coming up on a year of sobriety and I hadn't done my 4-step, and my sponsor said to me, he had given me like several dates to do a 4-step, which is a searching and fearless moral inventory of your life. And then you go over it in a 5th step with your sponsor or somebody else. And a lot of people, choose like clergy, or other people do it in groups, or some people that do that. And so I had kept on putting off the date, and I was back in college at that point, and he said, okay, you're off, right, for the holiday break? And I said, yeah. And he goes, we're going to do it on this day. And he goes, no, we're going to do it on this day, or you're going to get another sponsor. He was like, because my sponsees, they do 4 steps. And if you don't want to do a 4-step, then you need to find another sponsee. But that wasn't even him telling me that I had to do it. He was just telling me, if you don't want to follow my suggestions, this is how I sponsor. If you don't want to do the suggestions that I'm giving you, I don't know what to tell you, because this is what I do to stay sober. And if you don't want to do what I do to stay sober, then this isn't probably going to work. It was basically what he was saying to me, right? Well, my fear of getting another sponsor was greater than my fear of doing my 4-step. So I ended up doing a 4-step. And, that was my first 4-step that I did. So my attitude has really greatly changed about sobriety through the years. I think also I've had so many friends of mine that passed away. I worked in treatment, and I was trained to work with people that were on Suboxone, which is buprenorphine, and that's a generic term, or the diagnostic term for it. But I was trained to work with people that used Suboxone when it first came out. And, those people were in group therapy. They had to attend 12-step programs. They had to have individual therapy. They were drug tested like 2 to 3 times a week. They would only be given like 3 to 5 days doses at a time. Well, then within a year, you saw general practitioners, prescribing it. You saw people abusing on the street. You saw a lot of people. And that's going to happen with any kind of maintenance drug. And that's where I say you can find the good and the bad and the ugly. I know people today that are sober by way of maintenance drugs or are still on maintenance drugs and are doing fantastically. It is not my place to judge how somebody else gets sober. And I think I got caught up in that in a while. And it was really a reflection, early in sobriety, it was really a reflection of how I looked at things and how I felt about things, versus the reality of what was really going on, which was about me. So I got this comment on my video. That's a long-winded intro, 15 minutes, isn't it? Somebody said, I'm not sure you'll read this message, but I've been meaning to ask you how you feel about people using the word sober when they've gone from drinking once or twice a month and stopping completely. I don't judge anyone calling this act being sober, but I have wondered if this is offensive to a recovering addict who has a disease. I worry that this word is being overused as a fad and it minimizes other struggles. Well, first of all, I just want to say, I really appreciate the fact that you acknowledge that addiction is a disease, because so many people want to fight that fight, and it's a disease as diagnosed by the American Medical Association. So it is a disease, right? And I don't get into that fight with people because I'm like, if people want to fight that fight with me, I'd rather share my story and keep people alive. So I don't get in that fight, but I do appreciate that. I hadn't really thought about that, of like people that don't really drink that much and they do like sober January or whatever. I don't take any offense to that. But like I said, I'm not an expert and I'm not representative of any 12-step program. I'm only sharing my experience. I do not take offense to that word whatsoever and how somebody else wants to use it. When people will say things to me about being in a 12-step program and they still smoke weed or things like that, that to me, I take some issue with, because that's not, and the only way I can explain it to you is like if you were, this is a really bad analogy, but it's the only thing that's coming to my mind. So please do not take this analogy to heart, okay? But it's like if you claim that you're a Christian, but you worship the devil. Like it doesn't make any sense. It's contradictory, right? Like a 12-step program preaches abstinence. So if you're in a 12-step program, if you're struggling and you're coming to meetings and you're like, I can't stay sober, and you're getting a day at a time, that's a different story. But if you're saying that you're sober and you're taking coins or keychains and you're coming to 12-step programs and you're saying that you're sober and you're using on the side, right? That's a completely different thing, right? Like I do take issue with that as a member of a 12-step program, and I think most people in a 12-step program would, because as defined by a 12-step program, that's not abstinence. These are abstinence-based programs, right? But to somebody out there that wants to do sober January, no, I think that's great. Let me know how you feel afterwards as somebody that's not an alcoholic or an addict, how you feel not drinking. That's always so interesting to me when I hear that, because I wish I could do that. I can't do that, that's not in the wheelhouse for me. It doesn't work, right? So no, I don't take any issue with that. I don't even take issue with people that are heroin addicts that stop and smoke weed and they say they're sober. They're alive, right? However they want to define their sobriety, that does not affect me, It only affects me when it comes on to working a 12-step program, because 12-step programs are defined by a certain way. But if somebody wants to say they're sober and they do something else, they're a lot more sober than they used to be. Hey, I congratulate them, And I know people like that in my personal life, and I congratulate them. I know people that should be dead right now. Like, I am not singing out the praises of smoking marijuana. I think that, for me, an abstinence-based program is what works. I don't know. And I do know people that have stopped using opioids and then they, are chronically smoking marijuana. That's probably what would happen to me. But if I started smoking pot tomorrow, I can tell you, I'd start using everything. Because I would feel like, well, here I go. If I'm going to smoke pot, I might as well drink. I might as well do this, whatever, right? And so that's kind of where it would go for me. I don't know. To me, it's interesting that people quit one thing and then they just smoke pot and that works for them, right? But hey, you know what? That's what works for them. That's not my place to judge that or define that. And when I started staying out of other people's business about their sobriety, my sobriety started going a lot more smoother, because then I was focusing on myself, right? I think there's a lot of people that get caught up with this whole situation of, whatever. I mean, there's a whole discussion, in 12-step programs. I think it was really a bigger discussion, I would say, 4 or 5 years ago. When I talked to my sponsor, the first situation that happened was me hearing people talk about smoking pot. And he was like, that's none of your business. Then I had somebody ask me, to sponsor them, and they were smoking pot and whatever. And I asked him, he was like, well, that's a different story. You can't be a guide to somebody in sobriety when they're not sober and they're not willing to stay, because they weren't willing to stop smoking pot. That's a different story, right? There was this whole discussion about people on Suboxone, going to 12-step meetings, is that accurate or is that right? Whatever, right? right? For me, if it wasn't long term, like if their goal was at some point to wean off of it, I think like if their goal wasn't that I'm going to be on this for the rest of my life, like to me, because that's the difference between, I think, dependence and you know, and trying to wean off of it. But I have had several friends of mine that have been on, and I've had people that I've heard share in meetings and will say in meetings, I'm on maintenance drugs and I have a sponsor and I work steps, and people nod and whatever. I've also heard people tell me stories. I have never witnessed this, but I've also heard people tell me stories that after somebody will share after a meeting, they'll say, you're not sober because you're on a maintenance drug. I have never witnessed that. I have never witnessed anybody being kicked out of a meeting because they're on a maintenance drug, ever. In my life, I have never witnessed that. I rarely even witnessed the conversations of people saying, are they sober or are they not? I think maybe once or twice I've heard people say that, right? And it's usually people that have been around for a really long time. I think, you know, 12-step programs have kind of like molded through the years a little bit, at least the ones that I go to. I can only speak to the ones that I go to, right? The meetings that I go to. But like, they've kind of molded through the years. And as more maintenance drugs were prescribed and people were using them, I think we realized, you know, that this is not the same 12-step program that was designed, you know, 80 years ago that it's going to have to adapt over time. And so I don't think the same kind of stigma with maintenance drugs is the same as it is. You know, my thing is always this, and I was going to say this earlier, that this is my only stance on it. And I hope people understand that this is because I worry and I care about people, right? When I talk about the white knuckling thing, or I talk about people just saying that they quit something, they put it down, I'm talking about somebody that's an addict or an alcoholic or a chronic user, okay? When you do that, there's this empty part of you. Like, that's part of what working a 12-step program is about, right? Like, 12-step programs, only the first step is really about drugs or alcohol. The rest of them are about working on yourself. So when you put drugs or alcohol down and you don't go to 12-step meetings or church or therapy or group counseling or whatever to work on those internal issues with yourself, then you're not replacing that with anything. You can work out till you're blue in the face. You know, you might change it to other addictions and things like that. And that's been dangerous for me at different times in my life when I'm not doing things I need to be doing. Like, I've gone to like food and other things, you know, and that now I'm talking about food addiction on my, you know, Peter Does Stuff channel because that's part of my weight issues and stuff. So I've had to be very, very careful about that stuff, as have other people that I know, right? And so when you're not internally working on those things, they're going to come out in other areas, and maybe not just in cross addictions, but maybe in like how you treat people, or anger, or rage, or being short-tempered and things like that, or in how you handle relationships. And I think sometimes we mistake that for somebody being like angry all the time or whatever, for the fact that they never worked on those things that were inside that were really a part of their, you know, addiction to begin with. And that's the only thing that concerns me, is that for people that like stop using something, and then what we call that sometimes is a dry drunk, you know, is like, what are you replacing that with? What are you working on internally? You know, however you do that. It doesn't have to be a 12-step program. Are you going to church or some spiritual outlet or retreat? Are you going to therapy? Are you going to group counseling? You know, what are you doing? Like, what's replacing that, right? Like, what are you working on those deeper issues inside? Like, and I know a lot of people that start working out and things, and that's great, right? And I need to do more of that. But I've been walking a lot lately, and there's no walk that I've taken or run that I used to be an avid runner that ever was like really, I mean, sure, I felt better, but it wasn't really getting at the core of the issues that were eating me alive, of the people that I had hurt, and my character defects, and my root issues of like what was making me want to escape my life anyway. And that always concerns me about people, right? It's not me preaching, it's me being concerned about other people, because if that's not ever dealt with, they might go back to using someday, and that using might end up killing them, you know, or putting them in prison, or helping them lose their family or their job. And that concerns me about people, right? So for me, I don't really care, you know, how people define sobriety. Let people define sobriety the way they want to. I don't want to sit across from somebody in a 12-step meeting when we define it by abstinence and have them talking about all kinds of substances, and that wouldn't happen anyway. I don't know that I've ever experienced that happening other than like a maintenance drug. Outside, after the meeting, was when I heard people talking about being on the marijuana maintenance program and smoking pot and things like that, but not in a meeting. I very rarely have I ever heard that. I don't know that I ever have heard that in a meeting. But anyway, I mean, maintenance drugs, I've heard people talk about it, but very rarely as well. I mean, usually like after meetings and stuff like that. But that would be my issue because of a 12-step meeting. But in general, in the world, I take no issue. If somebody has one drink a year and they go, I'm going sober next year. Okay, go sober next year. Let me know how it works out for you, because you only drank one time a year. And I hope that, I don't have ownership over that word. Like, I'm not the owner of that word. You know what I mean? And no one person is. And I think, like, I'm so much more relaxed about it today. I think also one of the things that I've learned is the broader that my definition got with sobriety and being more inclusive, the more that I learned about other people's stories, and the more I learned about hope outside of what my own restrictive belief system was with a 12-step program. And the more that I saw that a lot of people were getting sober out there in a lot of different ways, this has just what worked for me, right? And it gave me a lot more hope. And, for people that I know that, like, want to go to a 12-step meeting and then they try it and they don't like it, I'm like, have you tried this? Like, there's this out there. There's different ways to get sober. I've told people that, And so I think it's, like, broadened my horizons and given me more hope that there's other ways that people can get sober. Just because I do this doesn't mean that that's going to work for everybody, or that's what they're going to choose, right? I just want people to stay alive today. I don't want their lives to improve, Not everybody's going to die of addiction that's an addict or an alcoholic, but their lives might end up being kind of crappy or really horrible. And I don't want that to happen to anybody. So however they define sobriety, that's up to them. That's their issue. In a 12-step program, I feel differently about that, because there are guidelines that we follow, and abstinence is one of that. So anyway, I hope that cleared it up. I thought it was a great topic. Thank you for asking that. If you guys have any other addiction or recovery questions, like I said, I'm not an expert. I'm not a representative of any 12-step program. I'm just sharing my experience, strength, and hope. I love you guys, and I will see you tomorrow. Bye.